Shri Krishna Namaha, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Now I am going to read the book Seek the Eternal, written by Shri A. Parthasarathi. This booklet covers the popular verses by Sri Shankaracharya entitled Bhajagovindam. Bhajagovindam deals with the basic principles of Vedantic philosophy and is a useful guide for translating the philosophical values and virtues into practical living. The thoughts and ideas contained in its 31 verses are presented in the form of short chapters. The Bhajagovindam is one of Shankara's many poetic compositions, and its verses are most popular for their melody and rhythm. The history of every nation passes through the best of times and the worst of times. So has India at one time enjoyed material prosperity and spiritual glory, and at another degenerated to poverty and immorality. However, when social and spiritual disintegration has set in, mighty men of spiritual vision have arisen in the country to pull her out and restore the strength and glory of her culture. Vyasa, the poet seer, was one such spiritual giant who fought against the forces of disintegration which prevailed during his period and revived the nation by compiling the Vedas and producing other scriptural literature as the Mahabharata and the Puranas. But as the wheel of time moved on, the country had again fallen into disintegration when the Buddha appeared and rehabilitated the people with his divine message of non-injury and compassion. Buddhism thrived for several centuries until a time came when it began to lose its power to hold the people spiritually integrated. At that time, it was the turn of the dynamic Shankaracharya to revive the country and her culture. His versatile scholarship and unrelenting efforts saved the nation from what appeared to be a spiritual crisis. The genius of Shankara not only vindicated and established the Advaita philosophy but also composed inspiring and devotional poetry which carried philosophical and practical suggestions in life. His Bhajagovindam, Dakshinamurti Stotra, and the Saundarya and Ananda Laharis are but a few of such poetic compositions. The Bhajagovindam was popular throughout the country for the melody of its composition and its cryptic suggestions. It points out the fallacies which are latent in one's hasty conclusions about life and also gives one a practical method of developing a proper mental attitude of love and service. The call of Shankara reaches man even today with the same vigorous appeal. The text deals with the two main objectives of the human mind: one, to avoid whatever is disagreeable and unpleasant, and two, to seek the agreeable and the pleasant. In other words, man desires to escape from sorrow, dukkha nivritti, and to court joy, sukha prapti. The first tendency in his mind is the motivating fact behind his attempts to acquire and hold wealth, while the second instigates him to indulge in the field of objects thus created by him. These endless pursuits after acquiring more and more wealth and having recourse to indiscriminate indulgence are his constant preoccupation in life. The chorus stanza of the Bhajagovindam stresses the futility of such pursuits in the world of objects. Man may acquire wealth in the world, but he does not gain peace and or contentment by mere possession of it. Neither does he get satisfaction through sensual indulgence in the objects acquired, for his desires multiply and cause agitation and sorrow within. Hence, There is a caution against Kanchana, wealth, and Kamini, woman, which represent respectively the two vain pursuits of acquisition of wealth and sense gratification. Instead, man is advised to divert his thoughts to divinity, for none of the worldly possessions or enjoyments can help him in the ultimate end. The warning against wealth and women was taken far too literally, and people developed a false sense of renunciation, resulting in an unintelligent abstinence from activity and consequent stagnation in life. Such misinterpretations are inconsistent with Shankara's own thoughts and deeds when one considers that he himself was very much in the world carrying on dynamic activities towards fulfillment of his mission. The word wealth covers not only money but all the other objects of the world as well. Man has been warned not to develop a craving for acquisition of wealth. Acquisition or possession of wealth as such is not prohibited, but only his uncontrollable yearning to acquire and possess it. Renunciation does not therefore apply in the world of objects, but to one's desires to acquire them. The desire or craving creates agitations in the mind, and an agitated mind adversely affects one's personality. For when the mind is agitated, the power of intellectual discrimination is lost. A man without discrimination is like a boat without a rudder in the high seas. Woman represents sensual indulgence of any type in the world. The warning given against woman is only to caution man to avoid excessive desire or thirst for any sensual pleasure. Desire for such indulgence also creates agitations in his mind, which in turn affects his progress in any field of activity. Thus, renunciation is meant to apply neither to acquisition of wealth nor to its enjoyment, but to the appetite that one bears for them. Hence, the Acharya appeals, renounce your thirst for wealth and woman and seek the Supreme Self within you, which alone can bring about eternal peace and happiness. The activities of living creatures are motivated either by their desire to avoid sorrow or to pursue happiness. With the view of avoiding sorrow, they direct their efforts to acquire the objects of the world, and having acquired them, they try to gain happiness by indulging in them. The Bhajagovindam indicates the hollowness of such material pursuits and calls upon people to contemplate upon the supreme truth and live a higher and nobler life. The opening stanzas urge them to control and overcome their desires for acquiring and enjoying the material wealth. Even for acquiring wealth, an individual has to apply himself intelligently to his cherished mission with a calm and composed mind. But when he is overpowered by a passion for procuring wealth, his mind is agitated. An agitated mind renders him unfit for any constructive work in the world, and his energies dissipate into unproductive channels. If, on the other hand, he performs his actions either secular or spiritual without an egocentric passion, but in a spirit of dedication to a higher altar, his mind remains tranquil, his intellect achieves sharpness, and his activities gain momentum and dynamism in any field of endeavor. Possession of wealth is but one aspect of human yearning, for no sooner the sense objects are secured, the mind longs for indulgence in sensual pleasures. Thus, with the object of finding happiness through such indulgence, man contacts them but is disappointed. Sense gratification can never provide an inner satisfaction, because desires for sensual enjoyment are insatiable, and to indulge in it is to add fuel to the fire. One way of getting over infatuation for the sense objects is to intelligently reevaluate and view them from a totally different angle. For instance, a passionate man sees in a woman only the contours of her body and considers her to be voluptuous form for sheer sense enjoyment. His lust is excited and he falls a prey to the temptation. But another man with a mature intellect evaluates properly and understands that beneath her smooth skin lies only a mass of flesh, fat, and blood. When such a view is adopted and reflected upon constantly, the passion for enjoyment gradually disappears. Life in this world is fleeting and uncertain. Its nature is likened to a drop of water trembling on the surface of a lotus leaf, which threatens to merge back at any moment into the water below whence it came. And even that short span of existence is riddled with diseases of the physical body and agitations of the mind. Nevertheless, man allows all his time and efforts to be consumed in merely pursuing the sense objects and trying to eke out joy from his contacts with them. The absurdity of man's extrovert pursuits is indicated in a striking metaphor in the epic Mahabharata. In the epic, there is a description of a hunter in the act of falling into a well. While chasing his game in the forest, he accidentally slips but manages to catch hold of a branch of a tree to avoid a precipitous fall. Under the burden of his weight, the branch above starts to give way. Below in the well, a huge serpent is waiting for a prey. In this struggle, he happens to strike a beehive. The disturbed bees swarm all around him, stinging his face and body. Hanging in this precarious condition, halfway down the well, he observes a few drops of honey oozing out of the beehive, and greedily his tongue reaches out to catch them. So, too, in this world, the cord of life may snap at any moment, and man has to face the results of his own wrong actions. Also, having disturbed the peace and harmony in the world by living selfishly, he suffers the sorrows of an egocentric existence. And yet, with all the uncertainty and troubles that face man, he does not hesitate to court the same sense objects for gaining his ephemeral joys. The sensual pleasures no doubt produce joy, but this narration helps one to think over and appreciate the inconsistency and impermanency of sensual pleasures in the general scheme of things in life. Man has lost sight of his spiritual personality and is tormented by the worries of the past and anxieties for his future. He lives an unhappy life for sorrow and dejection, but still he chooses to satisfy his senses rather than develop his spiritual strength and end his misery in life. Hence, the Acharya appeals, time is precious, seek the eternal here and now, rising above your silly fascination for the material world. Life is a passing phenomenon, unstable and uncertain. The material world is riddled with pain and sorrow. Nevertheless, man consumes his precious time in pursuing his vain desires and in gratifying his senses. The Bhajagovindam advises man time and again to give up his fascination for the fleeting joys of the world and seek the eternal bliss within. As long as man possesses the capacity to earn wealth and fame, there is always a retinue following him. The retinue follows him for his wealth and fame and not for his person. Out of ignorance, however, he attributes the following to himself and thereby feeds his ego. As age advances, his capacity to earn wanes away and the retinue diminishes until at last, in his old age, when he virtually loses it, he is treated with indifference and contempt even by his near and dear ones. Realizing this human frailty, an intelligent man should bear in mind, even while he has the capacity to earn, that secular achievements, whatever they be, are trivial and transient and can never be the main objective in life. Hence, he must, from the very beginning, learn to concentrate upon his inner purification and self development, which are his greatest wealth and which alone can lead him to the state of divine bliss. In order to turn the mind towards higher contemplation and realization of the divine self, a sense of detachment from the fascination for the world and its venues of enjoyment is imperative. Such detachment has to be cultivated at the mental level. It cannot be obtained by mere physical retirement from the world, but by maintaining a proper mental relationship with it. The infatuation for an extroverted life has to be renounced so that one may turn introvert and explore the possibilities of rediscovering the divine self subsisting within one's bosom. I pray God for the best of all. Sri Krishna Arpanamastu. Sri Krishna Namaha, Sri Gurubhyo Namaha. The continuation of Seek the Eternal by Sri A. Parthasarathi, Part 2. Another common weakness of mankind is the tendency to pamper the physical body. The body has no doubt its part to play in the material and spiritual progress, but to engage an entire lifetime in merely beautifying it and meeting its endless demands is, besides being quite out of proportion to the returns gained, so detrimental to one's progress and development. The body assumes a vicarious glory as long as life subsists, but no sooner the breath is extinct, it is repelled even by the next of kith and kin. This shows that in and by itself the human body is detestable, and the recognition and the respect that it enjoys is lent by the life spark pulsating in it. The body and its worldly enjoyments present an illusory enchantment to an extroverted mind. To fall a prey to it is to mar the dignity of human discretion and intelligence. The right attitude toward it would be to play about in the world as in the field for sport and to consider secular activities as hobbies in life, all the while remembering and maintaining a constant vision of goal of human existence. Man alone has this capacity to understand the futility of material pursuits and to conceive the glory of the higher vision in life. But the pity of it is that he allows himself to be entangled with life's activities and is never available for contemplation upon the higher truth. The usual preoccupations of man from time of his birth to death have been chronologically enunciated in order that he may come out of them and devote himself to undertaking an uninterrupted pilgrimage to the goal of eternal being. The childhood days are wasted in play, for a child has a tremendous attachment to toys and games. When the child has grown up into a youth, his time is consumed by lust and passion. He has no more attraction for playthings, but all his time and energy are wasted in courting the objects of his love. In the best of years of his life, he is busy aggrandizing to himself and his family the selfish passions of I and mine. Again, in old age, his mind is riddled with agitations as he is constantly worried over something or the other. Thus, at every stage, man is preoccupied with the demands of the age and finds neither the time nor the inclination to turn towards providence. In life, none can expect it to be completely free from the thraldom of worldly entanglements in order to take to the spiritual path. To wait for such a contingency is equivalent to waiting for the waves to subside for taking bath in the sea. Man has therefore to make an effort even while living through his particular era, to cultivate a mental disregard for its enchantments and turn to the eternal truth, which alone makes it possible for him to experience and enjoy those activities. Procrastination in the field of religion signifies death of one's spiritual personality. Hence, the Acharya appeals, seek the supreme truth right now and let not your precious moments pass away in your preoccupations with the world. The mind is created by a continuous flow of thoughts, and its nature depends upon the quality and the texture of the thoughts rising therein. Man is what his mind is. When his mind pursues the world of objects and beings, he develops an attachment for them, and when his infatuation increases, he loses his vision of life's ultimate goal. The Bhajagovindam prescribes a technique by which this mind can be directed to higher pursuits, culminating the experience of the divine self within. In the world today, everyone lives his life with clinging attachment for his wife and children, his position and status, and numerous other relationships with the things and beings around him. His identification with them is so complete that he has little freedom to exist independently and live a life of his own. This is a matter of individual's own creation. Man is advised not to surrender his individuality, thus, and become a victim of self-inflicted bondages created by maintaining an unintelligent relationship with the world. Instead, he ought to provide enough elbow room between his attachments and himself to be able to discriminate and take to free and independent actions. But the masses, through ignorance, still cling on the world and suffer the consequences thereof. One of the important aspects of spiritual sadhana is the practice of detachment from the world. But the word detachment has suffered so much misunderstanding that people in general have been decrying the word and trying to escape from what constitutes their obligatory duties and even life as such. In fact, the world is a glorious place to live in, and no religious master has ever condemned it. The attempt of religion is only to make a critical analysis of the world and thereby maintain a healthy relationship between man and all living beings and possessions, so as not to lose sight of one's role and goal in life. This family and environment of an individual are no doubt conducive for him to pursue his spiritual path, but the pity of it is that he, in such an atmosphere, foolishly develops attachment to whatever he contacts and loses his freedom to evolve to a state of perfection. Attachment or love for one's fellow beings is a healthy sentiment provided it does not degenerate into emotionalism beyond one's control. Excessive love is an unhealthy and imperative modification of the human mind, and not only is it detestable and detrimental to oneself, but to the victims of such love as well. As seen in the world, a wife suffers and repels the blind infatuation of her husband. Children get suffocated by the unintelligent love of their parents. Examples can be multiplied in portraying the false relationships created by a wrong accent on the sentiment of love. Every human being has a purpose and goal in life, and he should use the world to fulfill them. The world thus provides a field for exhausting his inherent tendencies, vasanas, and regaining his divine status. But whilst on the path of evolution, he falls a prey to the bewitching objects of the world and his own infatuation for his loved ones. These worldly attractions distract him from his goal, yet he must pull himself out of this rut and resume his spiritual path. The advice given here is to assess oneself and maintain a right relationship with the world. This is achieved by turning introvert and practicing self-introspection by questioning oneself as follows: Who am I? Who is my wife? Who is my son? Think over it. Who was my wife before I married her? How have I developed an attachment for her? Where was my son before I begot him? Where was I before I appeared in this world? Who am I now? Thus, one must reflect upon these questions over and over again. It is easy to define oneself in terms of one's relationships with other objects and beings, but that does not answer the subject question. One may be described as the son of the father, or the manager of an estate, or the owner of a house, but the question, who are you, still remains unanswered. Such self introspecting questions kindle one's desire to seek the Supreme Self, which lies beyond all bonds and relationships. Even as a seeker slowly releases himself from his false relationships with the world, he must get himself established to the higher and nobler aspects of life. Detachment from the lower needs to be substituted by attachment to the higher. For the purpose, the student is advised to cultivate healthy contacts at all levels of his personality by associating with divine company, maintaining noble sentiments, and studying and reflecting upon the scriptural truths. Maintenance of such contacts with the greater values of life is called satsang. It helps man to stabilize his sense of detachment, and with the help of detachment, his deluded vision of the world disappears. Thus, when false values are removed and a proper concept of life is developed, the mind is reinforced, and when such a mind is applied in meditation, the seeker attains to the state of Jivan Mukta, wherein he gets liberated from the persuasions of finite world and enjoys the state of absolute bliss and beatitude. Hence, the Acharya appeals, cast away your false attachments with the world through contemplation and right association, and seek your identification with the eternal self. The essential nature of man is divine, but having lost his union with his divine state, he assumes a limited individuality and seeks pleasure with the objects of the world, which are ever changing. While so doing, he identifies with the objects so completely that he is affected by whatever changes occur in them. The wise one, however, understands the ephemeral nature of the sense objects and does not get attached to them, nor does he entertain any desire for their acquisition and enjoyment. Such a man is no longer victimized by the changing world, and he gets slowly attuned to the divine essence within himself, which is the changeless reality around which all changes take place. A change signifies the death of a previous conditions and the birth of a new condition. For instance, the change from a flower to a fruit is the death of the condition of the flower and the birth of the condition of the fruit. Similarly, changes occur in the human personality. Childhood dies and youth is born, youth dies and manhood is born, and so on. Change, therefore, is nothing but a chain of continuous births and deaths. Man is aware of the changes taking place in his personality as well as in the external world. It is the principle of pure awareness within him which, remaining changeless, illumines and makes him aware of changing phenomena in and around him. This awareness in man is the supreme reality which represents the goal of human evolution. Because of its changeless nature, the Shastras sometimes describe it as an anvil, since the latter causes all changes to occur without itself undergoing any change. When man's attention is focused upon the kaleidoscopic pattern of changes occurring in the world, he slowly identifies with them and suffers the sorrows thereof. The persecutions of a changing world created by his wrong identification are called samsara. When he withdraws his association with the ever changing world and seeks his identification with the reality within, he gets liberated from the thraldom of samsara and begins to experience peace and bliss. And when his identification with the reality is complete, he gets absorbed into the state of absolute bliss, wherein he remains ever unaffected by the environmental changes. The changes in the world and the agitations associated with them being to those who identify with the world and not to the man of realization who has discovered the spiritual core of his personality. The cause for samsara is therefore one's wrong identifications. When the cause is removed by shifting the identification with the self within, the effects is no longer there. The Bhajagovindam assures that there is no samsara for a God-realized person since the very cause is annihilated. Three examples drawn from the common experiences in life illustrate the fact that the effect cannot exist when the cause is removed. The first of them describes an old man from whom lust and passion have gone away. Youth is the time for passion to play, and when it is past, man ceases to be passionate. The second example is that of a lake which is completely dried up. When all the water has gone away, there can be no lake anymore. The third example describes that when wealth is drained from the person, there cannot be no retinue following the pauper. Thus, a man of perfection living in the Supreme Self becomes a witness of changing phenomena instead of being a victim of the same. Not understanding this truth, man in his ignorance identified with the world and develops a vanity for his youth and strength, his wealth and possession, and his power of and popularity. Little does he realize that they are transient and short-lived. Nothing in the world is permanent. Things and beings and joys and sorrows appear and disappear like waves in the ocean. They stay for a while and pass away. The deluded in their imagination that these are permanent cling to them and suffer when they are lost. Part 2 of the Seek the Eternal by A. Parthasarathi is over. We will meet again in part 3. I pray God for all the best of all. Thank you very much. Shri Krishna Arpanamastu.